My daughter is obsessively, relentlessly righteous. When a boy in her class accidentally bumped her elbow while leaning over his homework, she reported him to the principal. He ended up having to transfer schools. When a male teacher stayed after class to tutor a female student, Dalia snapped a photo, posted it on the school forum, and accused them of having an affair. The teacher was fired. I tried to reason with her, my voice tight with frustration, but she only grew more defiant. "Mom," she said, chin lifted like a judge delivering a verdict. "Men and women should keep their distance. I won't tolerate anything inappropriate. Not from anyone. Not even from the people I love most." The night I worked late again, my colleague Mark offered to drive me home. The next morning, I woke up to find I was trending. A photo taken from a deliberately misleading angle had been plastered all over the internet. The comments were vicious, eager, and cruel, like strangers competing to say the worst thing first. And there was Dalia, live streaming from our living room. "This is my mom," she told her audience, voice cool and steady, like she was reporting the weather. "She keeps going out at night with strange men and leaving me home alone. This time she needs to learn her lesson. With the whole world watching, maybe she'll finally learn to behave." My stomach dropped. Listening to her speak about me like that, about her own mother, felt unreal, like the air had turned thin and sharp. Her sense of right and wrong had twisted into something cold, something absolute. She wasn't protecting anyone. She was dismantling my life piece by piece, and she called it morality. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly imagine, was that Mark, the man who'd driven me home, was her father. An undercover agent attached to a highly sensitive international case. A truth I'd buried for years to keep everyone safe, including her. I stepped outside and walked straight into a wall of hostility. Neighbors who usually waved looked at me with a mix of disgust and suspicion. Conversation stopped when I passed. Doors shut a little too quickly. Before I could even form an explanation, my phone buzzed with a message from the office. HR was gently suggesting I take the day off. I stood there for a second, staring at the screen, feeling like my body had forgotten how to breathe. Then I turned around and went back inside. The moment I opened the door, a phone was shoved in my face. Dalia's eyes were flat, her voice bright and performative for her viewers. "Hey everyone. Here she is. The woman who keeps sneaking out at night." I looked at her and felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. The little girl I used to hold, the one who used to fall asleep with her head on my shoulder, seemed like a distant memory someone had described to me once. Her viewer count climbed. The comments poured in, fueled by the story she was feeding them. People called me names. People made crude jokes. People demanded details they had no right to ask for. It was like watching a crowd gather around a fire and throw more wood on, just to see it burn hotter. Dalia followed me through the house like a shadow with a camera. "I'm going to live stream her 24/7, she announced, as if she were doing a public service. "I'll make sure she doesn't run off again. Join me in keeping her accountable." I went to the kitchen, she followed. I went to the hallway, she followed. I went to the bathroom, she was right there, trying to angle the phone around the doorframe. Something in me snapped. I grabbed the phone and threw it across the room. It clattered against the floor, skidding to a stop. "Dalia," I said, voice shaking with fury and disbelief, "have I been too lenient with you? Have you completely lost your mind? The bathroom is a private space. Are you really trying to film me in there?" She calmly retrieved her phone, checked it like she was inspecting evidence, and then planted herself in front of the bathroom door. "If you've done nothing wrong," she said, expression empty, "you have nothing to hide. What are you afraid of, Mom?" She looked at me, really looked at me, with the eyes of someone who had already decided I was guilty. "I'm going to watch you," she added. "I'm going to make you repent." For a second, I could barely see straight. Anger surged up so fast it made my hands tremble. I lifted my hand, pure instinct, pure heartbreak, pure desperation. And she didn't flinch. She leaned closer, almost daring me. "Go ahead," she said softly. "The whole world is watching. If you hit me, I'll have proof. I'll show everyone what you really are." My hand fell back to my side. My home, once the only place I could breathe, had turned into a stage where I could never step out of the spotlight. The walls felt too close. The air felt heavy. I couldn't stand it another second. I left. Outside, the stairs felt like needles. People whispered as I passed, the kind of whispers meant to be heard. You wouldn't guess, but she's that kind of woman. Her own daughter exposed her. Stay away from her. You don't know what she's mixed up in. I walked with my head down, wishing I could fold into myself and disappear. That night I stayed at my best friend's place. She tried to comfort me, telling me Dalia would grow out of it, that she'd understand one day, that teenagers can be extreme. But my chest ached. Because Dalia wasn't just being extreme. She was methodical. She was strategic. She was enjoying the power. When I returned home the next day, the house was full of strangers. A cleaning crew. Masks, gloves, harsh-smelling chemicals. Dalia emerged from the living room, frowning like I'd tracked mud across a white carpet. Mom, she said, with your lifestyle, you could be bringing all kinds of germs into the house. I'm having everything disinfected. The air burned my throat. The wallpaper I just put up was already blotched and discolored by the spray. Something hot and sharp rose in my chest. I snatched the bottle from one of the workers and slammed it onto the floor. What do you think you're doing? I said, voice shaking. Get out. All of you. Get out of my house. Dalia stepped forward immediately, positioning herself in front of them like a shield. I hired them, she said. They're providing a service. Until we're sure you're not bringing anything home, you don't get to make them leave. The workers muttered among themselves, loud enough for me to hear. That kid is so responsible. How did she end up with a mother like that? Poor girl. And Dalia stood there, impassive, while they sprayed and scrubbed and stripped away anything that felt like mine. The next day, I planned to go to the office and explain everything to my boss. I even rehearsed what I would say in my head, how I'd keep my voice steady, how I'd sound reasonable, how I'd prove this wasn't who I was. But before I could leave, I got a call from Dalia's school. Mrs. Dalton, the principal said, voice grim. We need you to come in immediately. When I arrived, I was met with stares so sharp they felt like accusations. Dalia had reported that I kept inappropriate materials at home, things that were supposedly harming her mental and emotional well-being. I walked up to her, my voice shaking. I'm your mother, I said, barely keeping it together. Why are you doing this? What materials? Show me. Dalia didn't blink. She reached into her backpack and pulled out my old physiology textbook from when I was studying for my medical license, along with a couple of women's magazines I liked. Nothing illegal, nothing obscene, just personal reading I'd kept tucked away. She flipped the textbook open to the chapter on reproductive anatomy, filled with clinical diagrams, then handed it to the administrators like she was presenting evidence. Can you honestly say this is normal? She asked, voice crisp and righteous. These are explicit images of private body parts. The adults, educated, trained professionals, still flushed with discomfort, because she'd weaponized their embarrassment. Then she opened the magazines. The headlines were sensational, yes, but it was the kind of thing you'd see at any checkout counter. Dalia lifted her chin, triumphant. And because of my mother's behavior, she said carefully, as if choosing words for maximum damage, I've decided to post her professional license and ID online so people know who she really is. The principal's tone shifted, suddenly alarmed. Dalia, I'm sure your mother didn't mean any harm. Mrs. Dalton, she understands she went too far. Let's all calm down. We can let this go, all right? Let's not post anything. Until then, the humiliation had been mostly anonymous, blurry photos, vague captions, the kind of cruelty that spreads fast but can still be denied. But official documents? My name, my license number, my identity? That wasn't gossip. That was a target. Before I could respond, my phone rang. It was my niece, voice strained and panicked. Auntie, why is Dalia at my office? She's here demanding they fire me. My vision went dark for a second, like the world had tilted. My niece had just passed her probation period at a government job. She'd worked so hard for it. I turned to Dalia, shaking with rage. How did you even find her office? Dalia's mouth curled like she'd been waiting for the question. Last month, she said, I saw her holding hands with a man on the street. It was inappropriate. Someone like that shouldn't be in public service. I stared at her, unable to believe what I was hearing. Your cousin is an adult, I snapped. Holding hands is not a crime. You're going to ruin her life. Dalia only tipped her head back slightly, calm as ever. Improper conduct is serious, she said. I don't care what people do in private. But if I see it, I will report it. I have zero tolerance for immorality. I spent the rest of the day trying to undo the damage, calling my niece's supervisor, apologizing, promising it would never happen again, pleading for mercy my niece didn't deserve to have to beg for. After that, my brother and his wife cut off contact with us completely. And then my information went up online anyway. Not just on obscure forums, but everywhere people went when they wanted to tear someone apart. My clearest photos, my full name, my schools, my workplace, my department, details that should never have been public. Even my address. I became a spectacle. Every move was documented, framed, reframed, exaggerated. Strangers camped outside my home. My phone filled with messages that made my skin crawl, people demanding access, making threats, treating me like something they could buy or punish. The rumors reached my office fast. Each retelling grew uglier, more confident, more certain, as if cruelty becomes truth when enough people repeat it. And the worst part was knowing the spark that lit all of it was sitting in my living room, my own daughter, still convinced she was the hero of this story. I used to think that was the worst kind of righteousness a child could have. I was wrong. Because not long after that chapter of my life, after the dust, after the headlines, after the bruising realization that love doesn't automatically make someone gentle, I met another kind of justice. The kind that isn't flashy and viral. The kind that doesn't need a ring light. The kind that builds a case against you in silence. My son, Caleb, had justice running through his veins like caffeine. It started small, the way nightmares always do, quiet enough that you tell yourself it's nothing, just a phase, just a kid trying to figure out the world. Our neighbor, Mrs. Hart, cursed once in our HOA group chat after someone blocked her driveway. The next morning, Caleb had reported her to her workplace for unprofessional conduct. She didn't get fired, but she lost out on a promotion she'd been chasing for months. She stopped making eye contact with me after that, like my presence alone was an infection. A week later, the third-floor kids tossed a paper airplane in the hallway. It drifted past Caleb like a harmless little ghost. The next day, he marched into the local precinct with security footage pulled from the building's cameras and a neat little statement he typed up himself. The parents got a fine and a stern lecture about public safety. When I tried to pull him aside, when I tried to keep my voice calm and my anger tucked behind my teeth, he stood there with his chin up, eyes bright with conviction, like I was the one embarrassing myself. "Mom," he said, tone sharp with certainty, "rules can't be bent just because it's inconvenient. Justice doesn't take days off." He paused, then added the line that should have made me run. "Even if you break the rules," he said, "I'll do what's right. I'll report you too." I thought he was being dramatic. I thought he was posturing. I didn't understand that my son wasn't threatening me. He was promising. The day it happened was so ordinary it makes me sick to remember. My office had a catered meeting. There were trays of desserts left over at the end, mini cheesecakes, lemon tarts, little plastic cups of mousse. The kind of stuff they normally toss out because it's easier than figuring out who's allowed to take what. My manager waved at the leftovers and said, casually, "Take some home if you want. They'll be in the trash by tomorrow." So I did. I brought a small box of nearly expired pastries home, the way a tired mother does when she's trying to make something sweet out of a hard day. Caleb watched me set it on the counter. He didn't ask what my boss said. He didn't ask if it was allowed. He just turned and went to his room. That night, I heard the printer running. Page after page after page. When I woke up the next morning, my phone was already buzzing with messages. HR. My supervisor. A calendar invite titled Immediate Meeting. Then a formal email, stiff and lifeless, informing me I was being placed on temporary suspension pending investigation. I stared at the screen until the words stopped making sense. Behind me, Caleb was pacing with his phone in his hand like he'd been waiting for the moment the curtain finally rose. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even smug. He looked satisfied, like a surgeon who'd made a clean cut. I sent them a 65-page report, he told me, almost gently, like he was offering helpful information. I included screenshots, timestamps, company policy, everything. My throat closed. "Caleb," I whispered, "what are you talking about?" He held up his phone and I realized he was on a call. Not with a friend. Not with a teacher. With the police. And as he spoke to the dispatcher, he glanced at me the way you glance at someone who needs to learn a hard lesson. "It's my mom," he said clearly. "She took company property." Then, as if I were a nervous child being comforted, he added, still into the phone, still calm, "Mom, don't panic. If you have to go in, just cooperate. Learn the rules. I'll wait for you to come home." I stood there, frozen in my own kitchen, while my son turned me into a criminal with the steady hands of a boy doing homework. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand yet, was that I'd once picked him up from under a bridge as a baby. A crying bundle in a cardboard box on a stormy night. No papers. No name. No official trail. I carried him home on instinct, on love, on desperation. I had raised him for 18 years. And now he was building a case against me like I was a stranger. When the squad car pulled up, the red and blue lights flickered across the living room walls, painting my face in alternating flashes of disaster. Caleb opened the door before the officers could knock. He stood straight, shoulders squared, voice crisp and rehearsed. "Officers," he said, "it's her." And then, because he couldn't help himself, he kept going. "I organized the evidence," he explained. "There's video from the office hallway. The policy about removing expired food. And audio recording where she admits she took it home. It's all on this drive." He handed them a USB like he was submitting a term paper. The officers looked at each other, uncomfortable. They looked at me, even more uncomfortable. "Ma'am," one of them said, voice careful, "we're going to need you to come with us to clear this up." When they led me outside, the hallway was lined with half-open doors. Faces peeking out. Whispers darting like insects. "That's the woman whose son reported her. Stealing from her own job. Disgusting. Can you imagine? Your own kid turning you in." I got into the back of the patrol car with my head down, holding my own shame like a heavy bag I hadn't packed. At the station, I sat under bright lights for 3 hours. I answered questions. I tried to explain, over and over, that those desserts were destined for the trash, that my manager had said it was fine, that it wasn't theft, it was leftover sugar in a plastic box. Finally, my company called and cleared it up. The desserts had been set aside as a small employee perk. They weren't pursuing charges. They'd handle it internally. The officers released me. I walked out into the night air feeling like my skin didn't fit right anymore. I called my supervisor to apologize, because that's what women like me do, even when we're the ones being crushed. There was a long silence on the line. Then he sighed. "Just go home," he said. "Take time off. We'll let you know." It wasn't time off. It was the slow, polite way people ease you out the door. I got back home and realized my key wasn't necessary. The door wasn't locked. I pushed it open and the smell hit me so hard my eyes watered. Bleach. Disinfectant. Something sharp and clinical that didn't belong in a home. Right by the entrance, there were black trash bags piled like evidence. My throw pillows. My mug, the one I'd used every morning for 10 years. A couple of magazines I'd been saving. A small souvenir I'd bought Caleb on a business trip when he was 12. And sitting on top, like a body laid out for identification, was my mother's old photo album. Caleb stood in the living room wearing bright blue gloves, wiping down doorknobs like we were in a contamination zone. "You're back," he said evenly. I disinfected the house. And I threw away anything that didn't meet hygiene standards. I ran to the bag and tore it open, hands shaking. My mug. My album. Pieces of my life tossed out like dirt. Caleb, I said, voice cracking, who gave you the right to throw away my things? He pulled off one glove with controlled irritation, brows knitting like I'd failed a basic test. Mom, he said, those items were either unsanitary or useless clutter. According to the household cleanliness guidelines, they needed to go. What guidelines? I snapped, half laughing because the alternative was screaming until my throat bled. What are you even talking about? He crossed to the table and picked up a stack of printed papers. I wrote them, he said, like that explained everything. For our home to be more orderly. He flipped through them and tapped a line with his finger. You violated Rule 17, he announced. Excessive accumulation of miscellaneous items. I stared at his flushed face, at the heat in his eyes, and I felt something in me tilt. I hadn't raised a son. I'd raised a machine that ran on regulations. The next morning, I went to the bank to pull cash because I needed space, just a few days somewhere quiet where I could breathe without feeling watched. The teller typed "ground" and then looked up at me with careful politeness. Ma'am, she said, your account is frozen. For a second, I couldn't hear anything but the roaring in my ears. What? I whispered. Why? She lowered her voice. We received a legal notice from the tax authority, she said. They're freezing funds pending an investigation into possible unpaid taxes. Tax authority. I went cold. Because I knew exactly who it was. I had a small hobby. I made handmade jewelry, simple pieces, nothing fancy, and sold them online. It wasn't a business in my mind. It was a distraction. A way to feel like something in my life was still mine. I never made much. Except for 1 month, last July, when a limited edition charm I designed got popular. I posted it on Instagram, it got shared, and suddenly I had orders coming in like a wave. I hadn't even thought about taxes. I kept a little notebook with my sales, and I kept it in my nightstand drawer. I ran home like my bones were on fire. Caleb was in the living room, sitting in a patch of sunlight, reading a paperback titled Basic Law for Beginners. He looked so clean, so calm, like a kid in a brochure. I stood in front of him, shaking. Did you report me? I demanded. Did you do this? He looked up, adjusted his glasses with maddening composure, and nodded once. Mom, he said, paying taxes is a civic duty. He spoke like a teacher explaining something obvious to a slow student. Last July, he continued, your shop exceeded the non-reporting threshold. Based on your revenue, you should have filed. The amount owed was $8.50. I blinked at him, sure I'd misheard. $8.50, I repeated, voice rising. You reported me over $8.50? His gaze didn't waver. It's not about the amount, he said, almost bored. It's about the principle. A violation is a violation. Even 1 cent is a stain. I felt my chest tighten. Do you know what that money was? I choked out. That was groceries. That was your college application fees. That was our life. Then you should earn it legally, he said, tone flat. Don't let money distort right and wrong. I stood there staring at him, hearing his words, and realizing he had no idea what it cost to keep a roof over someone's head. My phone rang. It was my brother. The second I answered, his voice came through like thunder. What did you teach your kid? He shouted. Your son reported me. My hands went numb. My niece had gotten violently sick the night before. My brother had borrowed a vehicle from work, after calling his supervisor and getting a verbal okay, just to get her to the ER faster. An emergency. 1 time. Caleb had taken photos without asking a single question and sent a formal complaint all the way up the chain. Now my brother was under investigation for misuse of government property. Are you happy? He roared. My career is on the line because your kid wanted to play hero. I'm sorry, I said, voice thin. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize to me, he snapped. Control your son. He hung up hard. I turned slowly to Caleb. He didn't look guilty. He didn't look shaken. He looked resolved. Uncle broke the rules, he said simply. Rules don't care about family. He lowered his eyes back to his book like we'd been discussing a news story. That's when I understood the shape of my life now. He wasn't going to stop. He was going to keep tearing things down in the name of order until there was nothing left but ash and policies. Word traveled fast, the way it always does in a community that loves a spectacle. I became that woman, the one whose son turned her in, the one who got taken to the station, the one who stole from her job. Neighbors who used to smile at me now angled their bodies away like my shame was contagious. My little jewelry shop got permanently banned by the platform for violations. My only extra income disappeared overnight. I stopped leaving my room. I stopped answering texts. I started sleeping in short bursts and waking up with my heart racing like I'd been chased. One afternoon, desperate, I pulled out an old photo album, pictures of Caleb as a toddler at the beach, Caleb with a fever on my back as I ran 3 blocks to urgent care, Caleb laughing so hard he fell backward into sand. I pointed at a picture where he'd written in crayon, "Mom is my superhero." "Do you remember?" I asked softly. "Do you remember who we were?" I thought it might wake something human inside him. He barely glanced at it. Then he pushed the album away like it was a cheap trick. "Don't use emotion to confuse the issue," he said coldly. "We're discussing your wrongdoing, not your nostalgia. Appealing to feelings is the lowest form of argument." His words cut clean through my last hopeful nerve. A few days later, he taped a paper to the front door. Household Conduct Code. It listed dozens of rules. Absolute silence after 10 p.m. Trash must be separated and removed by 8 p.m. No snacks in the living room outside meal times. Each rule had a point system. And under my name, he'd started writing violations in tight, neat handwriting. November 12th, trash not removed on time. -2. November 13th, ate an apple while watching TV. -5. November 14th, shower exceeded 15 minutes. Waste of water. -3. I stared at it and felt my stomach hollow out. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a prison he managed. And I was the only inmate. One night, I got up for water and saw his bedroom door cracked open. The glow of his monitor lit the hallway. He was awake, hunched over his desk, editing that 65-page report like it was a living thing. I caught a glimpse of a slide titled "Additional Evidence of Mother's Moral Failures." He'd added new bullet points. Questionable character. Tax violation. Attempted emotional manipulation to evade responsibility. In that moment, something inside me, something tender and exhausted, went quiet. Not rage. Not grief. Just a kind of final, stunned emptiness. Then the letter came. A certified envelope from the tax authority. When I opened it, my fingers shook so badly the paper crinkled. It said I owed $8.50 in taxes. And because I hadn't filed on time, and because I hadn't responded properly after the first notice, the penalties and administrative fines had compounded into something monstrous. A total of $150,000. I read it twice. 3 times. I couldn't make it real. And then I realized something else, the date on the notice, the timeline, the initial warning it referenced. I'd never seen any earlier letter. Because Caleb had hidden it. He'd hidden it because he believed I deserved the consequences of failing to take responsibility fast enough. I sat on the edge of my bed with that letter in my lap, hearing the blood pulse in my ears. I had no job. No savings. No shop. No way to pay. The only thing I owned outright was the house. The last thing my parents left me. The only anchor I had left. So I did what drowning people do. I listed it. A realtor called immediately. They had buyers ready. A young couple looking for their first place, eager and polite and quick to move. We set an appointment for the next day. That evening, Caleb came home and saw the realtor's business card on the coffee table. He picked it up. His face changed so fast it was almost frightening. "You're selling the house," he said, voice tight. "Yes," I said, my throat raw. "Because I need money to pay the fine you created." His jaw clenched. "No," he said sharply. You can't. This is our home, he insisted, like he just remembered the word. You can't destroy the structure of our lives because you don't want to face consequences. I let out a laugh that sounded like it hurt. Consequences? I whispered. Caleb, I'm cleaning up a disaster you set in motion. I didn't do anything wrong, he snapped, voice rising, eyes wild with certainty. You broke the rules first. You're the reason everything is falling apart. He lunged for my phone to delete the listing. I grabbed it back. We struggled, awkward, desperate, humiliating, mother and son wrestling over the last scrap of control in a collapsing life. He was stronger than me. He ripped the phone from my hands and raised it like he was going to smash it to pieces. I stared at him, at his face twisted by devotion to order, at his shaking arm, at his absolute refusal to see me as human, and something in me went still. I stopped fighting. I looked at him and smiled, slow and strange, like I'd finally found the one crack in his armor. Caleb, I said softly. His arm froze midair. He looked at me, confused. You love rules, I continued, voice almost gentle. You love what's legal. You love what's proper. I took one step closer, meeting his eyes. So let's talk about the biggest thing in this house that was never proper. His pupils tightened. What? He whispered. I held his gaze. Do you want to know, I said, how an infant with no birth certificate, no parent information, left under a bridge, legally became my son? The phone slipped from his fingers and hit the floor with a dull crack. His face drained of color. You're lying, he breathed. You're trying to manipulate me. I didn't answer. I walked into my bedroom, dropped to my knees, and pulled a dusty wooden box from under the bed. I hadn't opened it in years. When I lifted the lid, the smell of old paper and time rose up like a ghost. I took out a tiny, yellowed baby shirt, cheap fabric, stubborn stains that never fully washed out. I tossed it onto the floor in front of him. This, I said, was what you were wrapped in? Then I took out an old photo. A cardboard box under the shadow of a concrete bridge. A small baby bundled in rags, asleep despite the storm. Behind it, dirty river water, gray pillars, a world that didn't care if a child survived. This, I said quietly, was the first picture I ever took of you. Caleb stared. His hands trembled as he picked up the photo. His body swayed like something had struck him in the chest. No, he whispered. No. That's not. It's true, I cut in, voice flat with a kind of exhausted cruelty I didn't recognize in myself. Adoption requires paperwork. Background checks. Eligibility. I was young. Unmarried. Barely employed. I didn't qualify for anything. I watched his face crumble, piece by piece. So I did what I had to do, I said. I forged documents. I leaned on connections. I paid money I didn't have. I got you registered under a distant relative's name. I let the words fall like stones. By your standards, I said, I broke the law. I pointed at the photo in his shaking hands. And you, I said, were a child without legal identity. A boy who, on paper, didn't exist. Caleb's mouth opened but no sound came out. For 18 years, he'd built his world on rules. And now I'd pulled the rug out from under every belief he'd used to punish me. He slid down the wall and sank to the floor, hands clutching his hair like he could hold his mind together. He didn't eat for 3 days. He didn't come out. I didn't go to the door. I didn't beg. I didn't soothe. I contacted the realtor. I showed the house. The couple offered a fair price and barely negotiated. We scheduled the signing. The 3 days without Caleb's voice were the quietest my life had been in months. And the terrible truth was, I felt relief. On the 4th morning, as I grabbed my purse and keys, his bedroom door creaked open. He stepped out looking like a ghost of himself. Thinner. Hollow-eyed. Hair unwashed. The crisp white shirt he used to wear like a uniform now wrinkled and hanging off him. He wasn't a judge anymore. He was just a boy who'd watched his world shatter. Mom, he rasped. Where are you going? To sell the house, I said, calm as ice. He stumbled forward, panic flashing across his face. "Don't," he begged. "Please. Don't sell it. I'll fix it. I'll work. I'll borrow. I'll." "With what?" I asked, looking him straight in the eyes. "With your rules?" He flinched like I'd slapped him. He lowered his head, voice breaking. "I know I was wrong," he whispered. "I know. I shouldn't have reported you. I shouldn't have reported Uncle. I shouldn't have." Tears spilled down his face in heavy drops. "I ruined everything," he choked. I'm a monster. Punish me. Yell at me. Do anything. Just don't leave me." He reached for my hand. I stepped back. And the scariest part wasn't the anger. It was the emptiness. Because when I looked at him, I didn't feel anything warm rise up to meet him. It was too late. The son I loved, the one who once called me his superhero, had died somewhere along the road to the precinct, somewhere between the printed rules and the locked bank account. "Caleb," I said quietly, "this isn't a game where saying sorry resets the level." He shook his head violently, sobbing. "I can change," he insisted. "I can be better." "Damage doesn't unhappen," I said. "My job is gone. Your uncle's future was almost destroyed. Our life. Our home. It's not coming back." I walked toward the door. He grabbed me from behind, holding on like a drowning person. "Mom, please," he cried into my shoulder. "You're my only family." "Family?" I turned and pried his hands off me, one finger at a time. "When you built a 65-page presentation to destroy me," I said, voice cold, "did you treat me like family?" He froze. "When you called the police on me," I continued, "did you treat me like family?" His face crumpled. "You cut this," I said, tapping my own chest. "You severed it yourself. You don't get to demand it back because you're afraid." I sold the house anyway. When I signed the paperwork and saw the money land in my account, I expected relief to flood me. It didn't. There was only numbness. I went straight to the tax office and paid the fine. The clerk looked at me with a complicated expression, like she wanted to ask how a small mistake became a catastrophe. I didn't explain. I couldn't. With what was left, I bought myself a chance to start over. I packed slowly. Every item I folded felt like touching a memory that could still cut. Caleb hovered behind me like a shadow, reaching out to help and then pulling back, like he didn't deserve to touch anything I owned. When I finished, the only thing left was that wooden box. I opened it one last time. The lid will close. The photo. The life I'd once sworn I'd protect with my body. I pushed the box toward him. "These are yours," I said. "Keep them." He knelt down and ran his fingers over the rough fabric like it could explain who he was. At the bottom of the box, he found the photo again. And on the back, in my own handwriting, were the words I'd written 18 years ago. October 8, 2007. Under South River Bridge. Found you. Wished you a clear, safe life. That's why I named you Caleb. His tears spilled onto the floor. He looked up at me, eyes red and raw. "Do you regret it?" he whispered. "That night. Do you regret picking me up?" I stared at him. I didn't answer. And my silence was the cruelest answer I could give. I left with a single suitcase and no plan. I bought a train ticket south, to a coastal town I'd never been to, a place where no one knew my name or my shame or the way my own child had dismantled my life. As the train pulled away, the city blurred past the window like it was erasing itself. On that ride, I fell asleep and dreamed of that stormy night. In the dream, I heard the baby crying under the bridge. I walked toward the sound. I saw the cardboard box. And then Dreamy hesitated. And turned away. I walked on. I didn't look back. The crying faded into rain. When I woke up, my face was wet. I didn't know if the tears were for that baby. Or for the woman I could have been if I'd made a different choice. In the new town, I rented a tiny studio apartment with a window that faced the ocean. I got a job as a waitress at a seafood place on the boardwalk. It was hard work, long shifts, aching feet, the smell of salt and fryer oil stuck in my hair, but it was honest, and it was quiet, and no one asked me to explain my past. Little by little, the nights got easier. I stopped waking up in panic. Some mornings, I'd sit by the water and watch the tide come in and out like the world was breathing for me, steady and indifferent. I thought that was the end. I thought Caleb was a chapter I'd survived. Then one day, cleaning out the wooden box in my closet, I found something I'd forgotten existed. A small silver baby locket, tarnished, darkened with time. I'd found it in the cloth that had wrapped him under the bridge. I'd assumed it was cheap, meaningless, not worth much. I'd tossed it into the box and buried it under years. Now, holding it in the light, I turned it over and squinted at the tiny engraving on the back. One word. Graveyard. I stared so hard my eyes stung. It wasn't random. It wasn't nothing. It was a clue. A name. A thread. And suddenly, I remembered the day Caleb asked if I regretted him, and the way I hadn't been able to answer. Now I had an answer. I didn't regret finding him. I regretted the way I loved him. I loved him so fiercely, so desperately, that I tried to raise him into someone perfect, someone safe from the kind of abandonment he came from. And somehow, along the way, my love became pressure. My protection became control. And he grew into a child who could only feel right when someone else was wrong. I mailed the locket and a copy of that bridge photo to my brother with a short note. If he comes to you again, give him this. It's his past. It's his future. Tell him to find his roots. Tell him not to come looking for me. After that, I changed my number. I cut every last thread. And for the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me. The restaurant owner, a warm, loud woman named Rosa, started inviting me to dinner at her house. Her husband was a fisherman who was gone for weeks at a time. Her daughter was in college and only came home on breaks. Their home was simple, a little messy, full of life. Rosa taught me how to tell if fish was fresh just by the eyes. I taught her how to make the stew my mother used to make when money was tight. The days were ordinary. And after everything I'd survived, ordinary felt like a miracle. One night, Rosa's daughter came home for break, bubbling with gossip from campus. "You won't believe what everyone's talking about," she said, mouthful of rice. "There's this student who came back after taking time off, and he's asking around about something that happened 18 years ago, under South River Bridge." My chopsticks tightened in my hand. Rosa laughed. "Why would someone ask about that?" "Looking for his birth parents," her daughter said, eyes bright. "They say he was abandoned as a baby and raised by someone else. And now he's trying to trace his real family." "What's his clue?" Rosa asked. The girl leaned in like she couldn't wait. "A silver locket," she said, lowering her voice dramatically. "Engraved with the word graveyard." The room went quiet in my head. The food in my mouth turned to ash. "They wanted to interview him," the girl continued. "Local news, even some bigger outlets. But he refused. He said it was his own business, that he didn't want to take up public resources." She frowned, thinking. "People say he used to be this intense kid. Always reporting people. Always obsessed with rules. But now he's different. Like he finally got tired." I kept my eyes down and kept eating, pretending my hands weren't shaking. Later, walking home along the sea road, I felt the wind press against my face, salty and cold. And I thought, he didn't change. Not really. He was still obsessive. He was still relentless. He just switched targets. Before, he'd been obsessed with enforcing rules to make the world make sense. Now he was obsessed with finding a legal identity, an origin story that could make his existence feel justified. It was a new kind of trial. And this time, he was judging himself. A few weeks after that dinner, the restaurant's wind chime jingled. I looked up automatically, wiping the counter. "Welcome in," I said. Then my rag slid from my fingers and hit the floor. He stood in the doorway. Not the boy in the white button-down with the polished shoes and the righteous glare. A man in a plain jacket, skin darker from sun and work, hands rough, eyes hollowed out by something deeper than anger. The fanatic light was gone. What was left looked like exhaustion carved into bone. He didn't step closer. He just stood there like he didn't deserve to cross the threshold. "Mom," he said, voice hoarse. "I finally found you." My heart clenched so hard it hurt. But I forced my face into stillness. "You shouldn't be here," I said evenly. "This place doesn't welcome you." He swallowed like the words had weight. "I found them," he said, as if he hadn't heard me. "My birth parents." My fingers dug into my palm behind the counter. "They were poor," he continued. "They got sick back then. They thought they were going to die. They made a choice they spent their whole lives regretting." He lifted his eyes to me, red-rimmed, desperate. "They gave me life," he whispered. "But you gave me a place in the world." Then he reached into his backpack and pulled out a thick, hand-bound notebook. He set it on the counter gently, like it was fragile. The pages were made from the backs of printed slides. My throat tightened. 65 pages. His old report. He turned it into something else. "A journal," he said. "I took 2 years off school. I worked. I searched. I slept in bus stations. I got scammed. I also got help from strangers I didn't deserve." His voice shook. I started to understand the world isn't only rules. It's compromise. It's impossible choices. It's love. A tear fell onto the notebook. "Mom," he whispered, "I judged you with cold words from books. And then I spent 2 years judging myself with my own feet. Step by step." He inhaled shakily. "I reported you for taking leftover desserts," he said. "So I worked in the dirtiest kitchen I could find, handling expired food every day, learning what waste really looks like. I reported you for taxes," he went on. "So I worked at the docks, hauling crates, earning money $1 at a time, learning what survival costs. I reported Uncle," he said, voice cracking, "so I walked miles in winter with no ride, learning what helpless feels like." Then, right there, in front of the customers, under the restaurant's warm lights, he dropped to his knees. Not dramatic. Not staged. Just broken. He bowed forward until his forehead touched the floor once, hard enough that the sound made my stomach flip. "Mom," he said, trembling, "I was wrong." My body shook like it wanted to run. But my feet wouldn't move. All the memories I'd shoved down surged up like a flood: the plastic chair at the station, the neighbor's whispers, my brother's rage, the bleach smell in my own home, my son's eyes when he looked at me like I was guilty before I even spoke. "You're wrong now?" I snapped, the dam inside me cracking. "Now?" My voice rose, sharp and shaking. "When I was suspended. When my account got frozen. When people stared at me like I was dirt. When I sold my parents' house to pay the hole you blew through my life." I couldn't stop. I reached for the notebook on the counter with shaking hands and ripped into it. Paper tore. Slides shredded. Fragments fluttered through the air like a late snowfall. Caleb didn't stop me. He didn't fight back. He just stayed there on his knees, taking it like he believed he deserved it. "I don't have a mom anymore," he choked out, voice breaking. "My mom. The day I decided to be right. I killed her with my own hands." My chest heaved. My vision blurred. I didn't know if I was tearing paper or tearing my own past. When the notebook was ruined, he lifted his head, face soaked with tears, and spoke with a steadiness that hurt more than any screaming could. "I didn't come here to beg for forgiveness," he said softly. "I came to say goodbye." He swallowed hard. "I'm going back to the mountain town where I was born," he continued. "I'm going to teach there. Your brother gave me your address. And I just needed to say 2 things." His voice cracked on the first. "I'm sorry." Then he looked at me like he was trying to memorize my face, like he knew he didn't deserve another second. "And thank you." He bowed once more, smaller this time, and stood up slowly. He turned toward the door. And as he walked away, his back looked so lonely, so thin, that for a split second, it overlapped with the image in my mind of a baby under a bridge in a cardboard box. Something inside me broke open. "Caleb," I cried, the sound ripped from my throat like it had been trapped for years. He froze in the doorway. My voice came out raw, not accusatory, something worse. A mother's oldest doubt. If I hadn't walked under that bridge, I whispered, tears spilling, would you have had a better life? It wasn't a question meant to hurt him. It was a question meant to punish me. He turned back, eyes flooding again, and shook his head. Without you, he said, voice shaking, there wouldn't have been a me. Not the me you knew. He took a breath like it hurt. Mom, he whispered, if there's another life, let me take care of you. Then he was gone. I sank to the floor behind the counter, surrounded by torn paper, and cried like I hadn't cried in years. Not quiet tears. Not polite ones. The kind that wring you out. The customers drifted out silently, pretending not to see. Rosa came around the counter and wrapped her arms around me without asking questions. After that day, I got sick, fever, exhaustion, my body finally collapsing under everything I'd forced it to carry. But when I recovered, it felt like I'd been scraped clean. I stopped running from the past. Some afternoons, I would sit by the ocean and let the waves talk until my mind finally went quiet. A year later, my brother sent me a package. He didn't mention Caleb in the letter. But tucked into the lining was a photo. A group of mountain kids crowded around a young teacher with sun-dark skin, smiling so hard it looked like it hurt. Behind him, on a little chalkboard, written in messy chalk, were the words. Today we learn one word, hey. On the back of the photo, in handwriting I knew too well, there was only one line. Mom, I'm waiting for you to come home. Not in the next life. Home. He knew the home we destroyed couldn't be rebuilt. But somehow, in his own stubborn, relentless way, he was trying to build a different one, far away, made of meaning instead of walls. I held the photo and cried again. But this time, the tears were warm. That night, I pulled out a postcard and wrote the address of that tiny mountain school, copied from my brother's envelope. I wrote 2 short lines. See you in another life. Take care. Then I didn't mail it. I placed the postcard and the photo into the wooden box that once held baby clothes, and I closed the lid. I locked it away. Because some stories don't need a reply. Sometimes, the best ending you get is 2 people living on, separately, finally understanding what love is supposed to feel like. Rules matter. They do. But without love, rules become a weapon. And with love, real love, they're supposed to have warmth.